I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to be talking about The Ethics of Ambiguity by Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir is one of existentialism's leading figures. In The Ethics of Ambiguity, published in 1947, profoundly affected by the traumas of World War II and the occupation of France, she explores the various contradictions that beset the human condition, what she terms ambiguity, and how accepting our ambiguous condition suggests an ethics of freedom to disclose the world and further the freedom of others. The book makes sense of how we can still live a good life, a moral life, despite the state of abandonment we find ourselves in. I found it worthwhile to study the book in detail, and hence I present to you a series of videos breaking down each chapter, so that we can follow her argument and thesis to thoroughly understand what an ethics for an existentialist resembles. Chapter 1: Ambiguity and Freedom. Our ability to think is what distinguishes human beings from the rest of nature. Animals and plants merely undergo what happens to them, such as death, while we have a consciousness of what happens to us, since we know and can think about our deaths. Nonetheless, we remain a part of the world. Even as we experience ourselves as immanent beings with an interiority which cannot be penetrated by other beings, we also experience ourselves as objects that can be crushed by external forces. We are sovereign and unique subjects, and yet are also merely objects among other objects. This conflicted condition of being is what de Beauvoir calls ambiguity. Various solutions have been proposed to clarify this ambiguity, such as reduction, where the immaterial mind is reduced to materiality; idealism, where everything is only in our minds; monism, where everything is one substance; and dualism, where there exists both the physical body and the non-physical mind, albeit in a hierarchical way where the immortal mind is superior to the mortal body. Religious solutions include death being denied by the promise of eternal life, or life being denied as an illusion. Other solutions make us pure interiority, which is the opposite of pure objectivity. Some propose a retreat from the world, while some think we should yield to it. De Beauvoir elaborates on G.W.F. Hegel's reconciliatory solution, the dialectic, where aspects of the ambiguity is in turn opposed, preserved, and raised up into a synthesis, which again gets sublated in a movement towards absolute spirit. She finds this approach problematic because such a theory accepts that even events of grave harm such as war can be viewed simply as part of the movement of dialectical progress. She thinks that such attempts at rationalizing or reconciling the ambiguity of the human condition oversimplify the complexity of our fundamental ambiguity, worsening our disorder. Despite knowing that people are important, we treat one another like objects or obstacles. Our mastery of nature brings us closer to catastrophe than order. In our individuality, each individual is important, and as a collective, individuality is unimportant. De Beauvoir thinks that the first step to reconcile these contradictions is to admit and accept the fundamental ambiguity of the human condition, instead of trying to get rid of it or dissolve it the way the other approaches have been trying to do. By recognizing our true condition of ambiguity, we can draw our strength to live and our reason for acting from it. The reason why we need an ethics is precisely because we are deficient. Without failure, no ethics. One does not offer an ethics to a god, she pithily writes. It is because we are not yet who we can be that we strive to become the best versions of ourselves. As part of that striving, we try to find out how to live, which is a question for ethics. De Beauvoir's project in this book is to articulate an ethics which Jean-Paul Sartre had promised at the end of his magnum opus, Being and Nothingness, which he did not manage to complete. Sartre defines a human being as a being who makes himself a lack of being in order that there might be being. A lack of being arises because a person is a being for himself who wants to be a being in himself, but that is not possible. The being in itself is the essence of a being. It is a fixed, immobile being which is complete, but we can never be this being, since there is no such being. We are beings in the making, which means that there is no predetermined fixed essence which we simply are. However, we are beings that strive to fulfill ourselves, a being for ourselves. So there is this gap between what we want to be and what we currently are. We strive to close this gap, but we will never become complete. We can never be the being in itself. Hence, Sartre calls this striving a useless passion, since we can never achieve this. Only God can be a being that is both in itself and for itself. De Beauvoir seems to imply that Sartre was speaking loosely when designating this passion as useless, since what is useful, or otherwise, only becomes a question in the human world established by man's projects and the ends he sets up. This passion to fulfill ourselves comes from within us, and what is useful is what is useful to help us achieve our projects. We give ourselves projects and we give ourselves reasons for these projects, making them self-defined. It is our lack that propels us to try to fulfill ourselves. To attain his truth, man must not attempt to dispel the ambiguity of his being, but on the contrary, accept the task of realizing it, writes de Beauvoir. However, our efforts do not guarantee that our goals will be fulfilled, that we will be successful in achieving our projects. We should not make idols of these goals and view them as absolutes that must be fulfilled at all cost, even at the cost of our freedom. We need to abandon the dream of an inhuman objectivity, where we try to be right in the eyes of God or of others. We instead only need to be right in our own eyes. We must not believe in unconditioned values that take away our freedom. Here, de Beauvoir is arguing against absolutism, where a belief is taken as unconditional, such that it overrides everything else. She refers directly to religious belief in this paragraph, but it can also be ideological beliefs which may cause us to act in inhuman ways. There is nothing valuable or worthless before human beings came on the scene. It is our desire for an object that makes the object desirable and gives it a value. Before existence, there is no more reason to exist than not to exist. The lack of existence cannot be evaluated, since existence is the fact on the basis of which all evaluation is defined, she asserts. As a matter of fact, we exist. Hence the relevant questions are whether he wants to live and under what conditions, and not mere theoretical questions such as if human presence in the world is useful or if human life is worth the trouble of being lived. Fyodor Dostoevsky has alluded in his work of fiction, The Brothers Karamazov, that if God does not exist, everything is permitted. De Beauvoir inverts that notion. Because there is no God, it is us who then bear all the responsibility for the world. The world is our work, not God's, and it is shaped through our actions, which makes our acts definitive, absolute engagements. Our acts are definitive, are defining, because it is what we do that defines how the world turns out. If there is a God, He can forgive and make right the wrong that we do, but since there is none, our mistakes cannot be atoned for. Some may argue that because of an eternal afterlife, or the brief span of our lives, that life is of no importance. De Beauvoir thinks that this is absurd. Whether our lives have importance depends on us to give it importance, since it is us alone who feel our failures or successes. It is possible to deny that we can give ourselves meanings and aims, but that is then a question of whether we have freedom to choose for ourselves our own projects. Even for believers in God, they still have a decision to believe, a decision to sin or not, to adhere to the demands of the religious law or not. Similarly, we can want to give ourselves meanings and aims in adherence to the demands of our own heart. Existentialism has been accused of being subjective to the point of solipsism, solipsism being the concept where the individual is the only thing that exists. However, de Beauvoir counters this objection by pointing out that our subjectivity is a fact. René Descartes has demonstrated through radical skepticism, cogito ergo sum, that if there is a thinker thinking about its existence, that thinker must exist. That is an objective truth about our individual subjective experience. Existentialism affirms that the source of all values resides in the freedom of man. The world is not a given world, foreign to man, where he has to force himself to yield from without. It is a world willed by man, insofar as his will expresses his genuine reality, writes de Beauvoir. We are not merely objects in the world, propelled by external forces of which we have no control or choice over. Instead, we exert our will on the world, shaping it in accordance with our will. For existentialism, it is not impersonal universal man who is the source of values, but the plurality of concrete particular men, projecting themselves towards their ends on the basis of situations whose particularity is as radical and as irreducible as subjectivity itself, she writes. There does not exist a fixed set of values derived from a model of standardized human beings, because there is no standardized human beings to begin with. This ideal universal man does not exist. What do exist are individual people, each with their own individual subjectivities and unique situations. Our individual values are hence formed by the pursuits and struggles of individual people confronted with their specific, unique situations. But given our individual subjectivities and hence differing values, how do we arrive at collective values so that we can live together? It is not by denying our separation from one another, but admitting it, that de Beauvoir would then formulate an ethics. By turning towards this freedom, we are going to discover a principle of action whose range will be universal, states de Beauvoir, as she articulates how we can exercise our individual freedom in the context of a society. The aim of ethics is to win at life, according to her. Because we are creatures that face ambiguity, where we want to be in the fixity of our essence and yet cannot be that since we are living creatures that are changing continuously, what we can aim at is not to immediately be our essence, but to will a disclosure of being. To wish for the disclosure of the world and to assert oneself as freedom are one and the same movement, she writes. Firstly, to disclose our being, to figure out what our essence is and then to fulfill it, is a process, a movement, and not something known or given all at once. It is something that is not already here, but something that we work towards. Secondly, exercising our freedom is how we disclose our being, because freedom is the source from which all significations and all values spring. It is the original condition of all justification of existence. Freedom is the foundation from which we can base ourselves on in order to know how to act. This means that the man who seeks to justify his life must want freedom itself absolutely and above everything else. To be able to become our true authentic selves, we need freedom. To will oneself moral and to will oneself free are one and the same decision, according to de Beauvoir. Sartre asserts that we have ontological freedom in our beings. By ontological, he means that there is a kind of freedom that is given, that is part of our nature. Yet de Beauvoir talks about how we need to will ourselves to be free. Why do we need to will what we already have? She is referring to moral freedom. Even with our given ontological freedom, we still need to make the next step to bring this freedom into play through our choices, which is then actualized through our actions, moving from the ontological facts of what we are to the existential questions of how we should live given our condition and what we should do. We cannot will ourselves not to be free, since it is given to us in our nature, but one can choose not to will himself free. We have an ontological freedom, but we can choose not to exercise our freedom, the same way that we can have money but choose not to spend it. Laziness, heedlessness, cowardice, and impatience are some ways we can choose not to exercise our freedom. We can create a project, devise an aim, and then do nothing towards achieving it because we are lazy, not giving it attention, too afraid or too impatient to try to carry it out. That too is a choice which we make freely. We are only able to make such a choice because we are ontologically free. But to do the right thing, which in this case is to try to fulfill our goals, we need to use our freedom to act morally. To convert my flight into will, I must assume my project positively, she adds. Consider a person who has not set up a goal. That person will still be carrying out activities spontaneously but without any direction. It is when we have a goal, when we have assumed a project positively, that our spontaneity has a direction. My spontaneity confirms itself by reflecting upon itself, she adds. If we are headed in the wrong direction spontaneously, then by this self-reflection, we realize this, and then our will to go towards our goals corrects our direction. De Beauvoir talks about time. This will is developed in the course of time. It is in time that the goal is pursued and that freedom confirms itself. Based on our past experiences and our vision for our future, we are able to develop goals. The value of the chosen end is confirmed, and reciprocally, the genuineness of the choice is manifested concretely through patience, courage, and fidelity, she writes. Sticking to the choice we have made, by being patient, having courage and faith that it is the right choice, tells us that our choice is indeed the choice we want. In this way, we affirm that the choice is valuable to us. Acts which we have carried out become mere facts of the past if we do not return to it and justify it in the unity of my project. I made efforts towards my genuinely desired objective in the past and in the present. I envision my actions to lead to the achievement of my objective in the future. In this way, I invest my existence, past, present, and future, in it. To will is to engage myself to persevere in my will, she notes. Really wanting something requires continuing to want it until it is achieved. It is not sufficient that in my thoughts and speech I affirm my desires, but it also requires concrete action. Once I reach my goal, that achievement should be a new point of departure towards a new act of surpassing. In this way, our creative freedom can continue developing without stagnating into a mere fact of the past. Previous accomplishments should open up possibilities for new goals. In that way, we disclose more and more being. We discover, reveal, and create more reality, while affirming our freedom by being able to proceed towards our desired goals through our efforts. Our goals are only goals because there are obstacles blocking the path towards them. Some obstacles can be overcome, while some cannot be surmounted. We are infinitely free to choose our goals, but our powers are limited. Impossible goals are a fool's errand, but yet resigning, giving up what is difficult but not impossible, makes phantoms of the projects, which when we conceive them were still imbued with optimism. We become frightened of them, making these projects even more difficult in our minds. We become embittered over our wasted time and efforts. Taking a stoical attitude of indifference may help us psychologically, but can dilute our desire to keep trying. We are still free if we do not even try because of the fear of failure, but that makes our freedom just an abstract notion without reality. The way we can move forward, even with the possibility of failure, is for the content of our goals to aim at the free movement of existence. What this means is that the content of our goals should not close off further possibilities, but open up new ones when the goal has been achieved. My freedom must not seek to trap being, but to disclose it, says de Beauvoir. Our goals should be goals to extend our beings, not to become the being in itself, which is fixed and complete, but to continue to grow, actualize, and reveal more of our reality, so that we can move from the fixity of being to the dynamism of existence. She gives the example of Vincent van Gogh, who became unable to paint. However, since painting for him was merely a way of communicating, he found other ways to communicate, such as writing letters. If, however, further possibilities were cut off, one becomes wretched because he becomes unable to justify his existence positively. Instances of this include incarceration, where one is made to exert useless efforts like digging a hole and then filling it in repeatedly, or life imprisonment, where one's life is preserved as a fact, but he is not permitted to legitimize his life through carrying out actions towards his goals. Even if one wishes to revolt, revolt is a negative abstract movement which can only be fulfilled as freedom through positive acts such as escape, political struggle, and revolution. If a future is radically blocked off, where making positive actions is not possible, revolt can then be achieved only in the definitive rejection of the imposed situation, in suicide. So freedom can always be enacted, since it is when we are confronted with obstacles that we actualize our freedom to try to overcome them. Even if no possibilities remain, there is still the option to exercise freedom through a death freely chosen. Even then, freedom does not end. It is only by prolonging itself through the freedom of others that freedom manages to surpass death itself, notes de Beauvoir. We are born with ontological freedom in our beings, but to live our existence, we need to raise our lives to the height of moral freedom by choosing projects which disclose content, which objective is our moral freedom. I understand this to mean that our projects should extend our possibilities, our range of further projects from which we can freely choose from, and not limit our possibilities. Even after we die, our projects are still not futile if they extend the freedom of others also. Yet, how is it possible for people to choose badly by choosing projects that deny their freedom? De Beauvoir observes that it is precisely the possibility of making bad choices which allow virtues to exist. If we have no choice but are able to only choose and do what is right, then such choice and action of doing what is right is determined, and so there is nothing praiseworthy or virtuous about it. Hence, our being free means also that we can choose not to be free. Having freedom and choice also means having anguish, since we have to decide, sometimes in the face of uncertain outcomes and incomplete information, which explains why, as de Beauvoir observes, we slide incoherently between being free and rejecting our freedom. Thank you.